The rise of Derrick Rose was a story straight out of a movie. A hometown kid from Chicago, he was the face of a new generation and the youngest MVP in NBA history. He was the one destined to bring the Bulls back to glory after the Jordan era. But his story is also defined by what came next. A series of devastating, career-altering injuries and a public narrative of a career tragically cut short. We've all heard the public story of his downfall, but what really happened behind the scenes? This is the untold story of the immense pressure, the constant physical pain, and the deeply misunderstood resilience of Derrick Rose. The chants of MVP, MVP echoed through the United Center, not just for a basketball player, but for an entire city's hope. In the 2010-2011 season, at just 22 years old, Derrick Rose led the Chicago Bulls to a league-best 62-20 record, averaging 25 points and nearly 8 assists per game. He was crowned the youngest MVP in NBA history, a triumph that felt more like a cultural event than a sports victory. The entire city was captivated by the electric play of their hometown hero. The kid from Chicago's rough Englewood neighborhood was now an international superstar, a lightning-fast point guard who played with an explosive, fearless style, and he was the one destined to return the Bulls to the glory of the 90s. This was more than a sports story. It was a cultural moment. He was more than a player. He was a symbol of hope for a city that desperately needed one. But with that hope came an immense, almost suffocating amount of pressure to be perfect and to be invincible. And in the moments that followed, that pressure would become a silent, unseen character in the tragedy that would unfold. His downfall, as the public narrative calls it, began on April 28, 2012. It was Game 1 of the NBA playoffs against the Philadelphia 76ers. The Bulls were dominating, leading by 12 points with just over a minute left in the game. In a moment that would forever change his life and the course of the franchise, Rose went up for a jump shot, his knee twisting slightly on the landing, and he collapsed to the floor in immediate agony. The image of him writhing in pain, clutching his left knee as medical staff rushed to his side, is burned into the minds of millions. The sudden silence that fell over the United Center was chilling, a stark contrast to the roar that had just celebrated the team's impending victory. Teammates, including Joakim Noah, were visibly distraught on the bench, a collective sense of dread sweeping over the organization. An MRI later confirmed the worst fears. He had torn his ACL. The news rippled through the city and the basketball world, a collective gasp of disbelief. But the full, agonizing reality of what that single moment meant wouldn't be truly understood for years. It wasn't just a career-altering injury. It was the start of a domino effect that would steal his defining attribute, his explosive athleticism. The public story is simple. He got hurt and was never the same. But the untold story is far more complex, a tale of relentless physical pain, crushing expectations, and a media narrative that would turn a resilient player into a perceived failure. After his ACL tear, the media and the public scrutinized every step of his recovery. The entire city of Chicago held its breath, waiting for their hero to return. Fans chanted his name during games, a desperate plea for his return, for the MVP to once again save the team. When he was medically cleared to play in 2013 but chose to wait until the next season, the narrative took a vicious turn. The public believed he was abandoning his team, that he was soft, and that he no longer had the competitive fire. This narrative was fueled by a media firestorm and a particularly damaging quote that was taken completely out of context. In a candid moment, Rose said, "I know a lot of people get mad when they see me sit out or whatever, but I think a lot of people don't understand that when I sit out, it's not because of this year. I'm thinking about long term. I'm thinking about after I'm done with basketball, having graduations to go to, having meetings to go to. I don't want to be one at my son's graduation all sore just because of something I did in the past." This perfectly reasonable, forward-thinking sentiment from a young man who had already suffered a life-altering injury was weaponized. In a world where athletes were expected to be superhuman, Rose was seen as prioritizing himself over the team. The narrative ignored the severity of his injury and the fact that other athletes, like Adrian Peterson, who made a much faster return from a similar injury, were outliers, not the norm. Rose's cautious approach was medically sound, but the public saw it as a sign of weakness, an inversion of the relentless competitor they had come to idolize. They had invested their hopes in a warrior, and they felt betrayed when their warrior chose a path of caution. The truth is, his choice was based on the advice of experts and his own understanding of the fragility of a knee that had just undergone a major reconstruction. He knew that coming back too soon could lead to a series of more devastating, career-ending injuries. And sadly, that's exactly what happened next. The series of injuries that followed was relentless. It wasn't just one downfall, but a cruel and continuous cycle of pain and setbacks. In November 2013, he tore his right meniscus, a season-ending injury that occurred just 10 games into his highly anticipated comeback. In February 2015, he tore the other meniscus in the same knee. Each setback was more than just a physical injury. It was a devastating psychological blow. The explosive speed and high-flying acrobatics that made him a one-of-a-kind talent were gone. He couldn't accelerate or change direction in the same way, and the constant pain and swelling were a daily reality. The public saw a player who was injured, but they didn't see the countless hours of grueling rehab, the days of frustration, or the quiet desperation of a man who had lost the most vital part of his game. The media focused on what was lost, not on the agonizing process of trying to rebuild and reinvent himself from the ground up. His game, once defined by a lightning-quick first step and the ability to levitate to the rim, transformed. His trademark drives were now replaced with more jump shots and floaters, a necessary adaptation to a body that could no longer handle the same punishment. His career-high 50-point game with the Minnesota Timberwolves in 2018 is often highlighted as a moment of triumph, and it was. But the untold story is how he got to that moment. It was a journey of quiet resilience and incredible perseverance. He was no longer the MVP, no longer the explosive athlete who could fly to the rim. He had to reinvent himself as a player, learning to shoot the three-pointer, perfecting his floater, and becoming a crafty veteran. He went from being the face of a franchise to a journeyman, a player on short-term contracts, fighting for a spot on the roster. He could have given up. The money was already there. The legacy was already cemented. But he kept fighting. He played for the Knicks, the Cavaliers, and the Timberwolves, finding a way to contribute and be a valuable teammate. That 50-point night against the Utah Jazz wasn't a return to form. It was a testament to his enduring love for the game and his refusal to be defined by his injuries. The tears he shed after the game were not for a past that could never be reclaimed, but for the struggle, the pain, and the hard-won victory of simply still being on the court. It was a moment of release, a culmination of all the silent battles he had fought. His teammates, including Karl Anthony Towns, mobbed him on the court, a clear sign of their respect for the man and the journey he had taken. The untold story is that Derrick Rose never had a downfall. He had a career-defining injury that forced him to change. The downfall was a narrative created by the media and the public who couldn't accept that their hero was no longer invincible. They wanted the MVP back, and when they didn't get him, they created a story to explain his absence. A story of a player who had lost his edge. But if you look closely, you'll see the real story. The story of a man who showed incredible strength and dignity. The story of a player who, even when his body was failing him, never gave up on the game. He wasn't the MVP anymore, but he became something more profound, a symbol of perseverance, resilience, and the quiet dignity of a man who refused to let his past define his future. His legacy isn't just about what he was, but about what he endured. It's a lesson for us all that sometimes the most powerful part of our story isn't the highlight reel, but the quiet moments of strength and resilience that no one else gets to see. It's the story of a man who found a way to win, even when he wasn't winning championships, who continued to inspire even when his game was a shadow of its former self. That is the untold story of Derrick Rose.